Welcome to Let the Boys Kiss, the creation of queer ships, where we ask the question, is it queer baiting, queer coding, or queer canon?
This week we'll be discussing Blackbeard and Stede Bonnet from Our Flag Means Death. I'm Maddie.
And I'm Kelsey.
This is an exciting one. It's a little bit different than, well, if we even have a usual anymore, but
yeah. I think not to spoil anything, we're going to come to a little bit of a different conclusion in our end question.
Yes, exactly. But we should begin by saying, for anyone who doesn't know, what is the show and who are these guys? You probably have heard of Blackbeard, even if you haven't heard of the show.
He's a very famous pirate.
He's a very famous pirate.
But yeah, these two are pirates during the golden age of piracy, which was the early 18th century. Mm-hmm. It's when pirates ruled the seas around the Caribbean.
This is also, not that this is what's happening in the show, sort of the end of the golden age of piracy.
It's true.
So I don't know if we'll lead up to that or not in the show, but things are about to start to go poorly for pirates.
Yes. So at this time, only season 1 of Our Flag Means Death has come out. So that is what we have watched, and we have both seen all of it.
All 10 episodes. It was a real struggle. We usually do why do people ship them, talking about the beats of the relationship in the show. So let's go ahead and do a little bit of that.
Yeah, so I guess, right, the setup for Our Flag Means Death is there is a guy, a wealthy landed gentry type, who decides he wants something different out of life. And so he commissions a ship and becomes a pirate. And that is Stede Bonnet, the gentleman pirate.
The gentleman pirate. He's a real guy, shockingly. So we begin our show with him in charge of a band of pirates that he has somehow hired for his ship. But he is a very unconventional pirate. In this version of him for the show, they spend a lot of time just sort of hanging out on the ship, not doing a lot of actual piracy. The times when they do go and approach a ship to steal their goods, which is the heart of being a pirate. I think the one time we see it is they approach a tiny, not even with a sail,
a rowboat, a fishing rowboat.
They board with these 2 poor old people on board, and they steal a little potted plant from their ship. So that's sort of the level of piracy we're seeing from these guys.
All right. But basically for the ship, Blackbeard, who is a famous ruthless pirate, your sort of more traditional pirate, has heard of Stede Bonnet, the gentleman pirate, and is intrigued. And so he begins to make overtures to try to meet Stede.
Yes. And through a series of sort of miscommunication, accidental stuff, Stede does not realize that it is Blackbeard who is asking to meet him, because he has only encountered this guy, Izzy Hands, who is Blackbeard's right-hand man. But he doesn't like him. And Izzy is asking if he wants to come meet his boss, but he doesn't ever say that it's Blackbeard. And so Stede is just sort of like, no, screw you, go away.
No, thank you.
That makes Blackbeard even more interested because nobody says no to a meeting with Blackbeard.
And so, again, through a series of events that we're not going to get into, Stede is captured by the Spanish, and Blackbeard comes and rescues him in gallant fashion.
Totally. It's pretty exciting. And he approaches Stede and is like, the gentleman pirate, I presume. And Stede is like, you have heard of me?
That's cute.
It's about where they are.
During their capture by the Spanish, Stede has been stabbed through the gut. And so when we come back to them, I think it's in the next episode, Ed is watching over him as he recovers. And he is very impressed by all the stuff that Stede has, because Stede has a lot of cool stuff on his ship.
Yeah, Stede is a very unconventional pirate because on his ship he has built just like the most luxurious captain's quarters you've ever seen, which includes bookshelves and bookshelves full of books, which is a crazy thing to have on a ship, and also a secret closet for his auxiliary wardrobe, which is just the stuff from like out of season that he's not wearing right now.
His summer linens when it's wintertime. Yes. And of course he also has a fireplace, which is a deeply dangerous thing to have on a boat.
Fascinating.
But basically, Blackbeard, as we said, is intrigued by Stede's whole thing. He's gotten kind of bored with the day-to-day of being a cutthroat pirate, right? Like, he shows up and everyone's already so afraid of him. It's not even fun anymore.
He doesn't even have to threaten anyone.
I know. And here's this other pirate doing this completely different thing. And we do get some of Blackbeard's backstory where we learn that his father's like, you'll never amount to anything. Wealthy stuff isn't for us. And he's, like, well, what about all these silks? Can I have silks? Am I worthy of silks, Stede?
Oh, Stede thinks everyone is worthy of silks.
He does. Stede's very sweet.
He's a sweet guy. So, they basically, through this process of them getting to know each other and finding out about each other, they decide it could be cool if they could sort of do an exchange of ideas, and Blackbeard could learn how to be a fancy gentleman from Stede, and Stede could learn how to be a threatening pirate from Blackbeard. And they just are very intrigued by each other because they are so different.
Yes.
So this is sort of the setup for the premise of the rest of the season of the show. The first test of this really is in the course of actually doing some piracy under Blackbeard's command. They come across a invite for a fancy person's party on a boat.
Yeah.
Which is fascinating.
A yacht party.
A yacht party, basically. And Stede is like, that sounds boring. Nobody wants to go hang out with a bunch of rich people. But Blackbeard is like, this could be an interesting test. Mm-hmm. We should probably go try this out. And so Stede, coaches him up, teaches him about the various types of silverware he's probably going to have to use, and the different ways of interacting with rich people and how they use passive aggression to interact with each other. And so they go on this ship, and at first, Ed is having a great time. People are really interested in him because he's sort of new and different, and he says stuff about how he's killed men before, and they find that fascinating. Yeah. But then, as things do, they turn on him as soon as he doesn't fit in.
He gets his silverware mixed up, and so...
Yep. And so they end up being real mean to him, mm-hmm. and he doesn't take it well because he's not used to people being mean to him in words. And so he wants to go back and kill them, but Stede is like, you know what? Let me take care of this. Mm-hmm. And using his skills as a fancy gentleman, he goes in and passive-aggressively humiliates all of them in front of each other and really wins the day. And Ed could not be more impressed with what Stede has done.
Ed had rescued Stede from the Spanish, and now Stede has rescued Ed. And so then after that happens, they're going back to their ship, the Revenge. Mm-hmm. And they have a lovely moment where Stede does tell Ed that a piece of silk looks good on him.
Yeah, he tells him that it suits him, which he has never heard anyone say before, because he mostly has just lived his life as this, like, I'm an undeserving, lowly guy. I can't be classy. And Stede is like, yes, you can. Yeah, which is quite sweet. Then, in another episode, we get some more backstory about Blackbeard and how he has ended up on his path to piracy. We're seeing flashbacks with his father, who was clearly abusive, and his mother, who also was just sort of struggling through it at the time. He tells a story about a kraken killing his father as a scary story, because they all like to tell scary stories to each other. And then by the end of the episode, it is revealed that there was no kraken, surprise, surprise, and he had to kill his own father as a child.
He says, I'm the kraken. It was me.
Yeah, he has a whole breakdown moment where he's run to a bathtub and he's having this freak out moment about how he's not a good person. And part of this is because he had been telling Izzy Hands, his right-hand man, that they were only on the ship because he was trying to trick Stede and kill him and take his identity and blah, blah, blah. And then when, of course, it comes down to it, he is unable to kill Stede and take his identity. And he has this breakdown and confesses everything and tells him he's not a good person and he was the Kraken, and this is why he doesn't have any friends. And Stede is like, I'll be your friend. Yeah. And so they have this lovely bonding moment with a very emotional and vulnerable Blackbeard.
It's very sweet. I guess in the next episode, they go on a treasure hunt. Blackbeard is maybe about to leave. Izzy's pressuring him. He's like, maybe it's time to go. And Stede doesn't want him to leave because now they're friends. And so he devises something that he hopes will keep Blackbeard's attention, which is they stop at an island, also partially because they need citrus fruit because someone has scurvy.
One of them has scurvy.
Pretty bad scurvy. And he buys a treasure map and he harangues Blackbeard and another member of the crew, Lucius, to come search for this treasure with him, even though they're both like, treasure maps are never real.
Seriously.
But they're going along. Blackbeard is dragging his feet. Eventually, do they kill a snake? Is that what they end up killing and eating?
Yeah, snake comes upon them, and Blackbeard has to kill the snake, and then they're sitting there eating it.
Yes, and Blackbeard gets a little bit of snake in his beard, and Stede pulls it out. And Lucius has an epiphany. They're like, something is happening between these two.
He says, oh my God, this is happening, as he's watching them flirt with each other. Lucius really clues in to what's going on in that moment.
And he pulls Blackbeard aside, and he's like, this man really likes you. Stede really likes you. Do not break his heart. And Blackbeard is like, oh, okay. And so then he more enthusiastically goes on the treasure hunt with Stede, and I guess decides to stay on the ship as well.
Yeah. Lucius doesn't just tell him he really likes you, don't break his heart. He also tells him he really likes you and you really like him. So get your head out of your ass or you're going to end up alone is part of his message too. So I think that's a moment for Ed where he has this turning point and sort of changes his act. But then, of course, they are immediately in the next episode threatened by the presence of someone from Blackbeard's past.
Yes. Calico Jack shows up out of nowhere, seemingly, on another little rowboat just out to sea. And basically, like, he is Blackbeard's friend from when they were in college in a frat together. Like, that's the dynamic.
Yes.
And so Blackbeard sort of reverts in his behavior to be way more bro-y and awful. And eventually Stede has a conversation with Blackbeard where he's like, it's not that I hate Calico Jack or don't like him. It's I don't like who you are when you're with him. And Blackbeard is like, oh.
Blackbeard says, but this is who I am. This is me. And it's a real,
it's like, it's not
hard moment for him.
So what's also been happening in the background of the show is Stede accidentally killed a British officer, and then his twin brother found out about it. And now his twin brother is coming after him, and he actually sent Calico Jack ahead to kind of break up Blackbeard and Stede.
Alongside Izzy Hands, who also has been kicked off the ship at this point and wants to try to get Blackbeard back because he doesn't like the influence that Stede is having on him.
Ironically, he doesn't like who Ed is with Stede.
Yes.
And so Calico Jack reveals this to Blackbeard after Blackbeard has decided to stay back with him as Stede and the rest of the crew leaves. And he expects Blackbeard to be like, oh, okay, yeah, who cares if the British get Stede? And the British are arriving, and he ends up jumping off the boat with Calico Jack and swimming to the Revenge and telling Stede, you have to surrender in order to save his life. So Blackbeard, not living up to his reputation of being this horrible cutthroat, is like, no, the most important thing is that you live. Put up the white flag.
Yeah. And then that episode ends with they've been boarded by the British. Everyone has been arrested. They're in handcuffs. And the final shot is Stede and Ed both face down on the deck of the ship facing each other. And Stede says, you came back. And Blackbeard says, never left. And he winks at him. And then the camera zooms out on them. It's quite sweet. I also love when he makes the decision to abandon Calico Jack and go back to Stede, and he goes, fuck you, Jack, he's my friend. And Calico Jack says, what do you mean he's your friend? What kind of pirate has a friend? We're all just in various stages of fucking each other over.
So they're arrested by the British, and Stede is going to be put to death for murdering the British officer. But recently, the British king passed the Act of Grace, where if a pirate agrees to serve in the British Navy, I forget for how long, for a certain amount of time, they will be pardoned.
I think it's 10 years.
10 years. They will be pardoned of all their pirate crimes. And so this is something that Blackbeard invokes. At first, apparently, it does not apply to Stede because he's not a real pirate, but then his crew comes in and proves that he's a real pirate because they love him now too. And so both Ed and Stede are shipped off to join the British Navy.
Yeah, what's crazy is that Ed also has to agree to do this in order to save Stede. It's sort of like a package deal, which is shocking to all of the rest of his crew.
Especially Izzy Hands.
Yep. What was really funny to me is when Blackbeard is agreeing to go, Izzy says to him, do you really want to lick the king's boots? And earlier in the episode, the reason this is happening is that Izzy has been cooperating with the British Crown, and they get on the ship and the British people are like, you know, thanks to Izzy Hands for his active service to the Crown.
Yeah.
Oh, Izzy.
So they are taken into the British Navy. Ed, who has a glorious, obviously, blackish beard, has to shave his beard, which is a real shock to Stede and the audience, honestly.
Yes, but Stede goes, what have they done with your face? When he sees it.
And so, shockingly, like, Blackbeard is not as upset about being taken into the army as you might expect. But they end up having a conversation on a beach together where he's like, we only have this one life to live. And I want to be with you, Stede, whatever that ends up looking like.
He says, I just want to do what makes Ed happy. Yeah. And Stede says, what makes Ed happy? And he says, these past few weeks have been the most fun I've had in ages, years, maybe ever. So I reckon what makes Ed happy is you. And then Stede doesn't know how to handle that, so Ed just kisses him. Yeah. And then Stede says, you make Stede happy. Aww, it's sweet.
It's very sweet. So they decide to run away together, and Blackbeard comes up with this whole scheme, and he's like, okay, I've gotten a boat, meet me on the beach in the evening, we'll go together, get back to the Revenge, and just be together. And so that's all going to happen until Stede is kidnapped by the brother of the guy he accidentally murdered, who then accidentally shoots himself and dies.
They've got bad luck, those guys.
They do. And Stede is so traumatized by this that instead of joining Blackbeard down on the beach, he decides to go back to his family home, and he leaves Blackbeard.
I think this is a really interesting episode for their characterization because it doesn't come out of nowhere that he goes back to his family. All episode he's been having sort of these flashbacks about...
Well, really throughout the show.
Sure. But he's having this reckoning about whether or not he's a good person because of what happened with the accidental dead guy. And so he's been having all these flashbacks to his family who he abandoned. And he's realizing that he has this unfinished business. And he also... I think it's a cool episode because we find them at such different parts of their life. Stede had a midlife crisis, abandoned his life, ran off to be a pirate. Hasn't really even had a chance to live the life of adventure he was hoping for, right? Because his life of adventure just started when Blackbeard walked into it 2 weeks ago, or however long this has taken. Meanwhile, Blackbeard became a pirate when he was young because he really had no other choice. We've seen what a horrible backstory he has. And so he's done it all. He's lived the life of a pirate. He's ready to not do that anymore. He knows how horrible it is. It's left him feeling terrible as a person. That's why he at first is like, maybe we'll just go into the army and it'll be fine and we won't be pirates. And then as soon as he realizes Stede is interested in him too, he's like, no, we could run away and start new lives together in China. And Stede is not ready for that because he just feels like there's unfinished business.
Yes.
So they do sort of seed in as it's going on that he's not 100% on board with running away to start a new life.
Yes. At the end of the episode, he's not gone to join Ed, and Ed is distressed by this.
It's so sad. There's a scene of Ed on the dock waiting for Stede to show up, and it just like it cuts, through time so you can see he's there a long time, and it just gets sadder and
really
sadder.
Does. And so the episode ends with Stede going back to his family home and Ed going back to the Revenge and just being the most depressed as he gets back. But in a shocking turn of events, it turns out Stede's family was totally fine that he was gone.
They were way better off without him.
He gets home and his wife is like, oh no, she's blossomed as a painter and she's now dating her painting instructor and just having a great time. She's made all these widow friends who are all also super happy their husbands are dead.
Yeah, they meet to talk about how much they love having dead husbands. It's fantastic.
So maybe we should talk about what happens with Stede first and then talk about what happens with Ed and then where they end at the end. And so it does take a little while for Stede to like get the clue that his family would prefer if he was not there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it takes a little while for him to get the hint, but eventually he does. And he realizes that his wife is in love with this painting instructor. And he has a very interesting conversation with her about how she feels about this painting instructor.
Yes. So he knows that she is in love with this painting instructor, and he asked her, how does it feel to be in love? And she says, it feels easy. It's just like breathing. He understands my idiosyncrasies, finds them charming even. We expose each other to new things, new ideas. We laugh a lot. We just pass the time so well. I'd call those things love. I hope you find that. And of course, you're seeing a montage over her saying this of Ed and Stede doing all of those things.
And Stede says, I think I have.
And she says, really? What's her name?
Ed. His name is Ed. And then she hugs him.
She does hug him. It's so sweet and nice.
So Stede decides to fake his own death so he can go back to Ed, and he does it in a wonderfully elaborate way. But meanwhile, what's been happening with Ed on the ship?
Ed is really going through it in what I think is both the funniest scene and one of the most poignant scenes of the show. Lucius, who is the record keeper / emotional consultant, basically, of the ship.
Who we mentioned earlier is the one who first points out to Ed, like, this is happening. So
yes. So Ed is wallowing a bit, and he calls for Lucius's aid because he's the scribe of the ship. And so when Lucius finds him, he is in a blanket fort, wallowing in a blanket fort, and he's called on Lucius because he's been writing some song lyrics that he wants Lucius to take down for him. And they are the best possible angsty song lyrics. The song that he's written, the lyrics are, hanging on by a thread, hanging on, shouldn't let go. If I let go, all will fall. Fingers bleeding, down to the bone now. Can't let go. Nothing makes sense. Hold on, hold on, hold on. And he says this all to Lucius, and then he's like, you hate it, don't you? And Lucius is like, hate is such a strong word. I'm wondering what's happening in the song. Why are you hanging on? And Ed says, it's not about me. It's about someone else holding on. Someone entirely fictional. And Lucius says, and this fictional character, he's having a hard time. And Ed's face like crumbles. And he says, yeah, maybe. So Lucius has to give him some advice. It turns so sad, poor little Ed. So he's really trying to figure out what to do here, because the influence of Stede on everyone in his life is that we should all be more emotionally vulnerable, right? Share our feelings, talk to each other about stuff. We'll all be happier for it. And so Ed has definitely made some strides down that path. So he's writing songs, and eventually he's performing these sad songs for the rest of the crew. And the crew is, he's like, we should do a talent show. All the crew is on board. Meanwhile, Izzy is really upset about this turn of events. Izzy has this conception of what Blackbeard is, what he does, his whole aura, and that's the guy that he wants to follow. And this is not anyone that he recognizes as Blackbeard. So he keeps yelling at him to get his shit together and be the Blackbeard of old.
Yeah.
Right. And so Ed is trying to figure out what to do. Eventually he comes to the conclusion that it just hurts too much, right, to be emotionally vulnerable like this. It's not doing him any good. He decides, I got to go back to be the cutthroat, ruthless, no emotions Blackbeard. Unfortunately, the moment that he decides that, poor little Lucius comes upon him to talk about the talent show, and Blackbeard throws him overboard because he's seen too much, you know? We are left to wonder if Lucius has died, but there's no way Lucius has died, if we're being honest. And so then everything turns. He's like, Izzy, we're back on the old Blackbeard MO. Mm-hmm. They maroon half the crew on an island.
He cuts off Izzy's toes.
He cuts off Izzy's toe and makes him eat it, which Izzy loves. Yep. Izzy's like, the old Blackbeard is back, baby. And so, yeah, they maroon half the crew. They keep the ones that they think are valuable. Clearly, he thinks he's killed Lucius. And he's sort of just like, we're going back to being pirates again.
And they destroy all of Stede's stuff, which is still on the ship.
Yeah, so they throw away all of his books and his beautiful clothes and stuff. He's getting rid of every trace of Stede imaginable. Then this is right when Stede has had his revelation, decided to come back to his ship, presumably to make things right with Blackbeard. Stede comes upon his marooned crew, which is good at the very end of the show. There's a little wave to them. And then we also see that despite all of it, Blackbeard is in his room alone at the end.
He's in Stede's empty room that he's emptied out.
Stede's empty room. But he still has this lighthouse painting that was very important to Stede, and he's just crying alone in the room.
Yeah.
And it's so sad. How are these two crazy kids going to work it out?
We'll find out in season 2, but this is how season 1 ends.
So, I mean, spoilers galore there, but also clearly it is a canonical relationship within the show.
What's interesting about Our Flag Means Death, other than this alone, which is interesting, is it is not the only queer element of the show.
No, there's actually a fair bit of really interesting representation going on in this show, ways that we also won't talk about. There's a lot of interesting diversity within the show
Mhm.
in all sorts of respects. But for the purposes of this, we've talked about Lucius, obviously.
Yes.
But there's another character in this show called Black Pete, a much more traditional pirate, really into sort of violence, and he tells everybody that he used to work for Blackbeard before they ever meet Blackbeard, even though no one believes that it's true. And he and Lucius have this lovely relationship over the course of the show. An unexpected pairing, I think, not exactly who you would imagine for your set of queer pirates. But they have a whole arc. At first you see them hooking up with each other and it's not clear if there's anything sort of emotional going on. And then over the course of the show, something happens where Lucius is in danger. And afterwards, Black Pete comes up to say, I was worried I was going to lose you. And like they have this moment of sharing their feelings with each other. It's quite sweet. And so that's an interesting subplot of a relationship.
But also what's interesting about that subplot, and I guess as we're going to talk about generally also, is they're not like secretly in a relationship on the ship.
No.
Izzy Hands finds out that they've been hooking up and is like, I'm going to tell everyone. And Lucius is like, everyone knows.
Like, I don't know what you're threatening me with. And then later on, Lucius, to get out of doing some work, has offered to draw nude one of the other pirates from Izzy's group. And Izzy finds out about that and then is threatening that he will tell Black Pete that Lucius has done this. And Lucius again immediately is like, Black Pete, I drew what's-his-face's dick. And Black Pete's like, cool.
Yeah.
Like, everyone knows. Everything is
not
chill.
a problem.
There's not any jealousy going on.
Yeah. Something that is kept a secret, though, for a little while on the ship is the true identity of Jim.
Jim, what a mysterious figure.
Yeah, so at the beginning of the show, there is this mute pirate who is a member of Stede's crew named Jim. But it turns out Jim is not a man, I guess we can say.
Jim, born Bonifacia.
Yes. Is on the run because they killed another character's husband. Spanish Jackie.
Yeah, a complete Spanish Jackie who we haven't even mentioned, but that's a whole other plot going on.
But it's revealed, I guess when they get captured by the Spanish, right, they start to take off Jim's prosthetics. And initially they think that they're ripping off their nose. And everyone's freaking out. Like, oh my God, it's horrible.
It's already found out because Jim went swimming without their prosthetics. But then, when the ship finds out, it's because the Spanish are tearing off Jim's nose.
Yeah. And of course, revealed not a man. And so they go through this whole process of being like, wait, what do we call you? Who are you? Should you be on the ship? Because women are bad luck on the ship. But they move forward with Jim continuing to be Jim, and they use they, them pronouns. And that's sort of...
Yep. Without any discussion. The discussion is sort of, we didn't know you were a woman. Women shouldn't be on the ship. And Jim's point of view is just, how about this to make it simple? I've been Jim all along. I will just continue being Jim. Yeah. And they're all like, okay, great. And everybody just moves forward with that throughout the course of the show, which is interesting.
And Jim is played by a non-binary actor.
I believe so.
So we've got that happening as well. And then like, the final sort of queer element is what's going on with Blackbeard's other compatriots. So we mentioned Calico Jack, who is his frat friend from before. And he has an exchange with Stede where he's like, we all bugger each other. What are you talking about? Like, who cares?
Well, because there's this tension between Stede and Calico Jack about who has the, sort of rightful claim to Blackbeard. Because he is different with each of them. They have different history with him, and they are threatened by each other. And so then, there is this interesting scene where, sort of as a way of threatening Stede, because he knows that Stede clearly has feelings for Blackbeard.
Yes. Although
Calico
this is before
Jack,
they've admitted their feelings to each other and kiss.
Sure. But I think everyone can sort of read the vibes of the two of them. And so Calico Jack, to get in his head, is like, what, you're in love with Blackbeard or whatever? And Stede is like, what? I don't know what you're talking about. And Calico Jack's like, no, there's no shame in it. God knows Blackie and I have had our dalliances. Ooh, sorry, did I hit a nerve? Because Stede is like, wait, what? Like, Blackbeard's been hooking up with you? So that is interesting, and it's just treated as, like, a totally normal thing. It's not at all weird that would have happened. Yeah.
And then the last person is Izzy, and while it's unclear if there's anything super sexual happening, he's clearly in love with Blackbeard.
I mean, there's something going on with Izzy he's obsessed with Blackbeard and very possessive over him and really emotionally invested in his approval and all sorts of stuff. There's something going on with Izzy. I think a lot of people read that as him being in love with Blackbeard in whatever way, including, I think, the actor who plays Izzy, who has had conversations with people on Twitter to that effect before. So yeah, there's a lot of interesting
casual queerness running through the whole show.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Very cool.
I think the last thing we want to touch on, and this sort of relates to Izzy as well, because like you said earlier, you know, Izzy's very invested in this image of Blackbeard, which is this sort of more traditionally masculine Blackbeard. Mm-hmm. But one thing that the show does overall is sort of undercut toxic or traditional masculinity at every turn possible.
Yeah, whenever you could make a choice that is leaning towards toxic masculinity, they do the opposite.
Yes. And that is a lot through the character of Stede, who again is this person like, let's talk about our feelings. Oh, yeah, who cares if I dress fancy? It's all good. But one of my favorite scenes to this end is early in the show when the pirates are getting restless about not doing pirate things. They complain about how they don't even have a flag. And so Stede decides it'll be a fun activity for the whole crew for them each to design and sew their own flags.
Yeah, and then they'll vote on which one's the best, and that'll be the new flag.
And there's this scene where I think it's Blackbeard probably who's complaining about how sewing is women's work. Oh, we shouldn't be doing this, which is very, very funny because that is a commentary on today because pirates all would have sewn.
Every pirate would have sewn. There's someone on that ship whose sole job it is probably to take care of the sails. He's sewing all the time. Yeah. Anybody who got a hole in their clothes would need to know how to sew it because there aren't any women around, right? You can't just be like, wow, women are the ones who do the sewing when you also don't want any women on the ship because they're bad luck.
Yeah. Sewing, knitting, weaving, all that stuff being women's work is a industrialization thing forward, not a early 18th century thing. And so that's just a fun little example of the show being like, no, we can sew. It's fine. And they all design wonderful flags, particularly the cat flag.
Beautiful. I love the cat flag, Frenchie's cat flag. But yeah, they all do a great job with their sewing. And so it's an interesting thing because that is a signal to modern audiences. That's not like a real thing of the day. That's them being like, we're here to challenge your views on what men are and aren't allowed to do. And then they just sort of do that all the time throughout the show in various interesting ways. But I love Stede. I love Stede and his insistence on talking it out. There are many times in the show where he'll say to them, like, what do we do in situations like this? So that they'll all pair it back to him. Talk it through.
As a crew.
It's great.
It is.
Okay. So obviously we've laid it out. It's a queer relationship, right? They kiss. They want to be together. They're going to run away together to start a life in China in the show.
You would think no one could watch this and deny that it was queer. And I don't think we have any examples of that happening, but God, you'd be surprised.
You'd be surprised. We might get back to that conversation at some point in the future. But what we're not here to talk about, as is clear from all of this, is this queer baiting or queer canon or whatever, because it's there. It's queer canon. It's in the text. So we do want to talk about what the creators have said about this, as we always do. But I think it will take us in a little bit of a different direction than we are used to. Yeah. So at first, we want to talk about some quotes from David Jenkins, who is the head writer of the show, the creator. Taika Waititi, who is also an EP, plays Blackbeard, but has directed episodes and is a creative force behind this. And Rhys Darby, who plays Stede Bonnet, who also is clearly creatively involved. And things that they have said about sort of just the joy of making a show about gay pirates is how I would phrase this first section.
So the first quote we have is from David Jenkins, and I think he kind of lays it all out. He says, "To me, Stede and Blackbeard's relationship is the reason to make the show. When Taika and I were first talking about it, he was like, oh yeah, that's the show. I first started reading about Stede and how he befriended Blackbeard, and we don't know why. Very quickly it was like, oh, it's a romance."
Yes. And this is an interview that is both David and Taika being interviewed. And so Taika does agree. Yes, it was clear that it was a romance. But he, in this interview, jokes that Jenkins actually wanted to do it for a different reason. He says, David just wants to piss off homophobic historians. He just wants to hear them go, that never happened, which I'll agree is a fun thing to do.
Yeah. And so I guess, like, I don't know if it's clear from the quote, but apparently, like, what we have in the historical record is Stede and Blackbeard just decided to sail together for some period of time, and it's deeply unclear
Yeah.
why they
It's
would do
unclear
that.
why this happened, especially given what a strangely unconventional pirate the gentleman pirate
Right.
was.
And usually pirates didn't, like, co-captain sail together. So what could be the possible explanation? What are the things that could have happened that would
Who
cause
knows?
that?
We'll never know for real, but I certainly think this is a plausible explanation.
The next quote we have from Taika Waititi is, "I'm very proud of this romantic comedy we made. Very proud. It's not bromantic. It is romantic."
I appreciate that he is in the fight to try to retire the word bromantic.
Yes.
If I never have to hear anyone call something bromantic again, it will be too soon. So yeah, Taika's definitely getting in on the fun of this. And our last quote from him about this specifically is, he said, "I like to go on social media and see all the fan art and see all this sort of incredible soft gay porn that's been created around our characters and stuff. And I just really get off on it." And so this is an interesting one because there's been a ton of fan creation of art in particular around the ship, which I think even people not in the fandom, it was hard to avoid on Twitter around the times when people were lobbying for this show to get picked up for a second season, which we will return to later. But it's fun to see the creators really loving the fan appreciation and input around the show.
And then we also just saw some general quotes from Taika and Rhys Darby talking about the characterization of their characters and, you know, explaining their motivations and how they came together. And it's all very lovely. It's really,
they love these characters.
Yeah.
They love this relationship. There was a lot of interesting thought that went into how to make their romantic relationship work and be interesting and what their motives are. And I think David Jenkins even said he'd never written a romance before this. So this is a fascinating first one to do. But just sort of like why they fit so well together, why they're interested in each other, all of those, you can get plenty of quotes about them talking about that. But we don't need proof that it's a romance. That's usually what we're doing here, but that's not what we're doing today. I think there is a very interesting other conversation happening with David Jenkins in particular about queer representation in media. He's had to talk about this a lot because of the specific response to this show. So let's just start with some interesting quotes from him about that, I think. This one, he says, "The main thing to me was to sidestep coming out. I just want a romance. I want a titanic romance between these two people. We don't have to do the coming out story and then the non-binary story for Jim. We don't have to do the I am whatever, the pronouns, however they would do that. I thought it was just really good to skip it because we've seen it. These stories often become about the struggle of breaking through, which I think are really valid, but I've seen it a lot." And I think that's a conversation you and I have had on this podcast before about how often queer stories are coming out stories. And he's right. We have seen that a lot.
Yeah.
So it is kind of pleasant to watch a show where there are all of these queer characters and they're just sort of there with no explanation. They are. They don't have to be justified or, you know, we don't need any reasoning, especially in historical things. It's very hard for people to avoid the trap of like, we need to explain why there would be queer people in the 1700s. And it's like, you don't have to explain that. There were queer people in the 1700s. I promise you there were. So
I hate to break this to you. There's always been queer people.
Exactly. So I think that is like nice to hear, healthy difference from a lot of our showrunners. But where we get to the nexus of David Jenkins and our show in particular is with the upcoming quotes.
Yeah. And so I think what is also interesting, so that was their, you know, what we just said was their approach to the show. But it seems like David Jenkins did not fully understand prior to making the show what queer baiting was or how frequently it occurred or what impact it would have on people. So he said there were people being very afraid that we're not going to do it, which is fair. I didn't realize how deep that ran until honestly this week. After you watch the 5th episode, it's very clear they're almost going to kiss, and people either don't believe we're playing it or don't engage with it when they're writing about the show. I didn't expect that. I thought it was quite explicit that they had feelings for each other. People are picking up on it, but they don't actually believe that we're going there. And then Taika Waititi adds on, "You've just got to smash people over the head with it, I guess."
So the response, it was clearly a surprise to them. I think if you're not in fandom spaces, particularly queer fandom spaces. Obviously, this isn't something you're as literate in. And if you have come across it, I feel like people, especially in David Jenkins' position, will likely have come across it from the point of view of other writers, people in the industry, whom their perspective might be queer baiting is this thing that people complain about unreasonably, and the fans jump down your throat because of blah, 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 when you didn't actually do anything wrong. Like that probably is the sort of narrative he would have been hearing about queer baiting before this. And so then to be met with people, you're clearly writing a romance, you're telegraphing romance. That scene with the silk thing, Ed leans in as if to kiss Stede, and then they have this awkward okay, good night, and he like punches him on the arm.
Your classic rom-com moment where two characters almost kiss and then don't.
Yes. And so I think in his mind, as you're writing this, that's the moment, if you didn't know before, that's the moment where you should be like, oh, these two are in love, they're going to get together. And people sort of not wanting to get their hopes up, either not noticing it at all, which I guess is part of his thing where he says people would write about it and not even talk about that subtext of it. Yeah. Or people who are like, I don't want to get too excited about this because I've been burned before. Exactly. It never happens. That was a real surprise to him. And then we have this very interesting quote from him about it where he says, I think I didn't realize, because I see myself represented on camera and I see myself falling in love in stories, I didn't realize how deep the queer baiting thing goes. Being made to feel stupid by stories, I guess. And his interviewer asked, how do you mean? And he says, as we were breaking the season and looking at how it would go, part of me knew that, yes, Stede and Ed's romance was going to be real. But one part of me felt like, we're going to do this story and they're going to kiss, and maybe that's not even going to be that big of a deal. Maybe it'll just be a blip. But then looking at how people were kind of afraid to let themselves believe that we were doing that was a surprise to me, and it's heartbreaking. I understand it much better now, and it's like, oh, you were made to feel stupid by a bunch of shows. Unintentionally, by and large, I think, but made to feel like, maybe I'm going to be up there. Maybe that'll be me in this story. And then at the end of it feeling like, oh, no, it's not me. I'm not in this one. That fucks with you at any age, I think, but especially when you're young and impressionable. I know it would make me feel that I didn't belong, and I think that's part of where the response to the show comes from. So he's really like gone on a journey over the course of making this show. It's fascinating. I feel like it's very sort of like he's having a human response to this. He's putting himself in the shoes of all of the people that have responded.
And it's very sympathetic, because I think as we've seen throughout the course of doing this podcast, right? A lot of times writers are very dismissive of people being emotionally invested in seeing themselves on screen. But I like that phrase, like they were made to feel stupid by stories, right? Like, and even I think if you're not necessarily looking for representation, it's frustrating to see a story and see plot points put in that are clearly indicating the story is going in one direction, and then being told you're stupid for thinking this is what this indicated, when it's like
sometimes explicitly by showrunners being told, you guys, I don't know what the fuck you're talking about. You guys are crazy for saying this. When you're watching it, I can see it with my own two eyes that this is what's happening. So yeah, you're right. That phrase "made to feel stupid by stories" is really interesting, because that also is something I feel like gets dismissed. Like, even if that were the case, I think a lot of people are like, it's just a story. Like, who cares if you were wrong about it or if blah, blah, blah. Like, how can you be made to feel stupid by a story? And even if you were, who cares? It's just a story. And I think stories are very meaningful to people. Stories are how we as humans interact with the world and with each other. Yeah. And so it's really cool of him, I think, to look at it from this angle.
And it's like, it's one thing, right? If you're watching a mystery, you expect a twist, and that's fun, obviously.
Yeah.
But I think it's another thing if you are not expecting a twist and the story does not indicate a twist, to just be like, oh, you dummy, you looked at all these things I was writing and you thought it was being serious. You're so fucking stupid. I tricked you. And you're like, that's
not a thing to trick me about. Yeah, that's so rude. You just want to feel better about yourself because your audience believed that you were not lying.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I think this is fascinating. I want to hear from more showrunners going forward as we proceed. And, in this, it's friggin' 2022 at this point. This is what I would hope the the viewpoint would be of a lot more people, but it's the first time I've really seen this perspective from a showrunner. I feel like I've seen people who are like, you know, excited about making queer media. I've seen people who are, you know, happy to have queer fans and not really invested either way in making queer media, but are sort of like, oh, this is fun, I guess. But it feels like this sort of affected him as a person, thinking about he, as someone who is, I think, presumably a cisgendered straight white guy.
Right. Based on what he said about generally seeing himself in stories.
Yes. To really be like, you know what? People are having this emotional experience about it, and I'm not going to devalue that. Clearly, they're having an emotional experience for a reason, and I want to think about what that reason is and realize, like, it probably has profoundly affected me that I see people like me on screen all the time. Everything that I watch has a person like me in it. And that's not true for everyone. That's not true for a lot of people. And this is cool. Everyone should do more of this.
It's really interesting too, right? Because it's very in line with the tone of the show of being like, oh, let me validate your emotions.
It is. Clearly this characterization of Stede is coming from somewhere.
Yeah.
But David Jenkins, fascinating.
Yeah.
It's also just interesting. It's a real rarity, I think, to hear creators use the word queerbaiting and be talking about it in a not dismissive way. I feel like that is something we do not get a lot of. Over the course of this show, we've encountered it maybe a couple of times.
For sure.
So, pretty fun.
Great job, David Jenkins. Looking forward to season 2.
I am. We all need to find out if Lucius is still alive first and
I gotta
foremost.
know what happens with Lucius. I was so sad when Ed pushed him overboard. I was like, no, not Lucius. I mean, it was also very distressed when he marooned most of the crew on that island.
Yeah. They're gonna be okay. Stede found
It did
them.
seem like they were about to eat each other, though.
Yeah, they have one of those sort of cartoon moments where one of them is taking a nap and he's laying on his side, and another one of them seemingly sees him as like
A turkey
the
leg.
shape of a turkey leg. But yeah, I'm excited to see how things resolve with Stede and Ed. Like, clearly Ed has felt betrayed here. That's going to have to be addressed by Stede. Stede was seemingly taken by surprise that he was in love with Ed at all. So that's going to have to be reckoned with. And I think that Ed is going to feel real bad about trying to murder Lucius.
Yeah. And probably destroying all of Stede's stuff.
Well, yeah, but once he has Stede back, it's just stuff, you know?
I guess. I don't know. I get sad anytime books get destroyed.
Yeah. But Stede's relationship with books is very interesting throughout. But they'll go rob more people and steal their books, like he was doing before.
That's true. They did take a ship and they were cross-referencing which books they already had to make sure they just didn't like double up. So
yeah, I love that. Well, because that's very early in their relationship. So Stede is there like, I'm taking books that I don't have and I'm putting books that I've already read back in their places. Like, that's the good way to do piracy.
Yeah.
But Blackbeard's just there like, what is wrong with you? This is not how you be a pirate. It is how Stede is a pirate. He's a gentleman pirate.
yeah, he is.
So those are our quotes from our creators. A very interesting collection. Now shall we move along to the literature?
Yes. What are the fans doing? We know what the creators are doing. They're doing great stuff. What are the fans doing? Are they meeting them where they are? This ship exploded.
Exploded, people. Like, this one is about to make a big showing on next year's, top 100 ships of all time list.
Yeah.
Like, they had a year. It was number 5 on the 2022 top 100 ships. They right now have a little more than 10,500 stories just in the Stede/Ed ship on AO3. I think they have almost 15,000 Our Flag Means Death stories. It came from nowhere, and it had a big moment. I think as soon as it became clear to people that it was actually going to happen, it just went crazy.
Yeah, it blew up.
Yeah.
So it will most likely be on the all-time list next year.
Yeah.
Which
the
is
year
great.
after it came.
Because as much as
one
now we
season
don't
in.
have any black people, at least we'll have an indigenous person.
It's horrible. It's so horrible. So, we always read the most kudosed fic in the ship. In this case, that is a fic called Close Quarters by Fortinbras FTW
For the win.
So this was a short one,
Mhm.
less than 5,000 words, which is somewhat common. Most of the time, I think they're pretty short fics. It is explicit,
Mhm.
which for the first season we were tracking, but I think we're doing less of now because our realization at the end of last year was
We're not collecting.
I don't know that it really
know anything.
Yeah, it doesn't seem to really mean anything whether or not a ship's most kudos fic is explicit or not, or long or not, or whatever. It's all just random noise.
Yeah.
So, tell me about the fic, Close Quarters.
So this seems to take place in like not the timeline of the show because it doesn't feel like they've confessed their love to each other and then this has happened. It seems to like
Correct. This is
yeah,
could have happened at any point over the season, I guess.
So basically they've gone to Nassau and they're going to have some fun on the island. And so Stede is walking with Ed. Ed sees someone and he's like, shit, we got to get out of here. And they start running. It turns out that Ed has some gambling debts. But Stede pulls Ed into like a little shed off of the street that they're running down to get away from these people who are chasing them. They are then, in close quarters. Ed is a little claustrophobic, so Stede tells him a story to talk him down about his little kitchen garden, which is very sweet and very Stede. And then they have a sexual encounter, and it's pretty explicit from there. And then they're like, do you think anyone hurt us? And then he was like, yeah, people definitely hurt us.
Yeah, we're totally screwed. I think that about tells it. It's a not uncommon trope in both fanfic and regular fiction that people sort of get stuck hiding somewhere together and then things get a little spicy.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I thought the characterization was all right, and I like Stede's little story about his kitchen garden. It's quite sweet. And I always like, it's a vulnerable moment for Ed that Stede can help him with. That's always nice. So yeah, it was a sweet little fic with, I think, like more than 17,000 likes. This one's seeing some action. We won't get into scholarly work, but there is a lot of writing on the internet about this show and how it has affected fans. There's a lot of interesting writing about the phenomenon of people who had been queer baited not being willing to buy into this show and what that means. So the exact thing that David Jenkins was talking about. So it was hugely popular, the show. People were talking about it and people were talking about that element of it, which I think is interesting because you could have had traditional media sort of address it as like, oh, it's just a show about gay pirates. I guess it's 2022 and that's what happens now. But instead, people were out there saying like, there's this weird phenomenon where fans aren't sure if they could believe that they're gay pirates, even though it seems like they are.
Yeah.
Why is this happening? So that's pretty interesting to see all of that.
Okay, so this has been a lovely time so far.
Yeah.
There doesn't seem to be controversy between the creators and the fans. The creators have an interesting and thoughtful perspective on their fandom and why they might react the way they do. The show is very lovely. Has there been any controversy around Our Flag Means Death?
There was this little bit of a sticking point where the show was hugely successful. Everybody's watching it. It's one of the top shows of the moment. I think immediately they're picking it up for a season 2, right? Like it's a hugely popular show. They've clearly invested a lot in it. It's not a cheap show. They have Taika Waititi, who's one of the hottest people in Hollywood, locked down to star in a television show ongoing. You think pickups are coming. You've got people online asking David Jenkins and Taika and Reese, are we doing season 2? When's season 2 coming? And you've got your writers saying, God, I wish I knew. We all want to do season 2. We have no pickup. I wish I could tell you. I have no more information than you do. Don't know what's happening here. And so we get this movement of fans, some classic fan organization. They start a Twitter campaign, a hashtag Renew Our Flag Means Death campaign, where I think a lot of people probably would have seen some stuff on Twitter. It was everywhere, that hashtag with art and, GIFs and all sorts of stuff. It was all over the place. And even more interestingly for us, some fans organized a traditional letter writing campaign.
Yes, you told me this, and I said, actual letters? Like they wrote them and put postage on them and mailed them?
Yes, they were organizing. I think they were sending a lot of postcards, maybe not as many letters, but they were physically mailing.
You still need a stamp for that.
Exactly. To HBO Max to say, I love this show. Please pick it up for season 2. And so this was drawn out and drawn out. The last episode of the season aired on March 24th. There's all this mystery. How can this even be a question? They must be about to pick it up for season 2. There was some internal drama happening at HBO Max at the time because all sorts of stuff was happening. Discovery bought,
it's the mess
Warner
of
Brothers.
Discovery, Warner Brothers.
All sorts of stuff was happening. So it was like, maybe this is the conflict. I'm really not sure. And then the funniest possible thing happened. June 1st rolls around. People might be aware that June is Pride Month here in the United States. June 1, the show gets picked up.
Oh. Thanks, HBO Max.
Could it possibly be a stunt on the part of HBO Max? We'll never know.
No, they didn't say. They didn't say, in
But
honor of
to
Pride
roll-
Month, here you guys go.
But you
Gay
do
pirates.
sort of roll out. We're so happy to be picking up this show with our picture of these gay pirates on it. June 1st, as I'm sure they had their rainbow flag logo on Twitter.
Yeah.
Whatever was going on. So that's a little silly. That is sort of the height of the drama around this show, though.
Very happily, though, it was picked up, so we will get a season 2, apparently sometime in 2023. I cannot wait.
They started shooting it in September of 22.
Because honestly, if the show had ended like that on that cliffhanger, unacceptable. I can't do that.
Absolutely. What's happening with their relationship? What's happening with Lucius? Like, we got a lot of unanswered questions. So we will be seeing again. Very exciting, super cool show. Always fun to see gay pirates. I will say, personally, you and I have been hoping for a gay pirate show for quite some time because in one of our many various Wikipedia deep dives, we came across the idea of these pirates who would enter into basically marriages with each other.
Yeah.
Like a contractual relationship with another pirate where if you died, then all your stuff would go to that pirate. And it just felt ripe for gay pirates, man.
I mean,
they're out there.
As we've also talked about before, it's a bunch of people who can't live in regular society for some reason. Something about regular society is not jiving with them. They need to get away.
And what they have chosen is to go get away with a bunch of other men on an isolated ship.
Yeah.
It's sort of the same stuff people say about sailors, in the Navy.
In the Navy. You can sail the 7 seas. So yeah, looking forward to that. I guess we can check back in with our flag meets death at some point. I don't know how and when we'll do that with our new schedule, but we'll figure it out.
Yeah, we'll see if anything newsworthy, noteworthy happens around it. So, this is when we would normally ask the question, is it queer baiting, queer coding, or queer canon?
It's queer canon. It's just straight up queer canon. Which is great.
It's queer canon.
I love
it. This question becomes interesting here. If you gender swap the characters, would they be a couple? Seems like no.
Yeah. They seem kind of gay.
I mean, particularly Stede was married, ran away from that because it wasn't doing it for him.
Yeah.
So that's a fun little twist.
It is.
But we don't have to do the why isn't it canon? Because it is canon. We don't have to do the how do we feel about the queer baiting on a scale of 1 to 5.
There is no queer baiting.
Even though that is my favorite question of the show.
It is a fun question. It's a 0. There's no queer baiting, so here we are.
So this was very satisfying. I feel good about this. This is an all happy all the time episode of this podcast.
Yeah, very unusual, but it's a delightful show. It's that sweet, sweet New Zealand humor you'll love.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, Taika and Reese have been working together for decades at this point. Their chemistry is fantastic. Mm-hmm. It's clear as you're watching it that there are tons of unscripted moments because it's just their vibe.
And honestly, all of the characters are great. We didn't mention most of the characters, but all of the characters are fantastic. I'm in love with Rory Kinnear as both the guy that Stede accidentally murders and who accidentally kills himself.
He's phenomenal. Every episode that has some sort of new character in it, that character is played by a great comedian who you will recognize. The whole crew of the ship is fantastic. We didn't even really talk. We talked about Jim, but Jim's relationship with Alu is just I
love Alu too.
Sweet. Oh my gosh. They are lovely. It's just, this show will fill you with joy. Yeah. If you for somehow missed it the first time around, go take a look because it is just a fun time. Mm-hmm. So to keep it rolling, what are we talking about next time?
More gay pirates!
More gay pirates! You knew they had to be out there. These can't be the only gay pirates in the world, and they sure aren't.
Mhm.
We are going to talk about an older show than this one, but which has had a resurgence, I think, in large part due to this show. A show called Black Sails.
Yeah. Came out in what, the mid-O's on Stars?
Was it that early? I can't remember. It is a Stars show from somewhere in the last decade to 15 years.
No, it's the mid-10s. It's 2014.
The mid-10s. Okay. So it's not that old of a show, but it did sort of fly under the radar. And then now that there are all these other popular gay pirates, people are out there saying, you should check out the original gay pirates. And we will be seeing, interestingly, a lot of similar characters because this is a show that is half characters that are real pirates.
Yeah.
So you will again be seeing Blackbeard and Calico Jack and all sorts of people that you've seen. Izzy Hands is in it.
Mhm.
He's not called Izzy in the Black Sails.
Characterized a little differently, though, it seems.
They're all characterized a little differently. But gay pirates for the win, keeping that rolling. And that is going to transition us nicely into gay cowboys.
Yes. So next episode is Black Sails, and then the episode after that, we're going to do gay cowboys. So, we always ask for questions, comments, concerns. We've gotten so many great suggestions over the course of this podcast from listeners, but we want to make a specific call out. If you know of any gay cowboys that we should be taking a look at.
Probably movies, but if there are shows that are somehow about gay cowboys,
let us know.
That we've never heard of, that's fine too. Obviously, they don't have to be explicitly gay.
Right.
To give you an example, we'll probably talk about Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid in that episode.
Yes.
So anything with some subtext, a couple of characters with great chemistry, and they're cowboys. That's all we need. That's all we need from you people. But we're excited about that. I think it's sort of a similar genre of traditionally very masculine characters.
A lot of toxic masculinity in the cowboy community as well.
As well as the pirates. But let's see if we can undercut it with some interesting queer ships. So please send us those ideas. That'll obviously be out in 4 months.
Yeah.
So you've got a little bit of time to help us out. In the meantime, if you have comments, questions, concerns, anything that you want to say, if you want to just gush about Our Flag Means Death to us, honestly, we would be happy. Reach out to us at ltbkpod@gmail.com. We are also on Twitter and Tumblr at ltbkpod. If you are enjoying the podcast, give us a subscription. Subscribe.
Don't give us a subscription. I don't
know what that means, but subscribe to the pod. Tell a friend. Give us a like, review. The next episode will be out in March of 2023 with Black Sails, wherever you get your podcasts.